Hi, this is Greg with Lionquestfitness. Today we're going to talk about this beautiful old Winchester 290 and what it has in common with this TZ-75. Let's talk about the TZ-75 first. Now, this is a Tanfoglio made CZ clone. It was made from the paperwork, and I have the original box, in 1985. Now, I fell in love with this gun the first time I saw it, with that deep bluing and those wooden grips. And it's a 9mm, 15 rounds. But what made me think that the gun had never been shot before was how stiff the slide. It's still very stiff, although not as stiff, since I've been working the gun and shooting the gun. Now, it has a decocker safety, which I like a lot. However, it is very much a right-handed gun, so it's a little bit quirky for a left-handed shooter like myself to be able to manipulate. If I were going to carry this gun, I would carry it like we carried the Beretta 96 with one of the departments I worked for some time back, about 2 decades ago. And I would go ahead and put one in the chamber, and then I would drop the hammer with the safety decocker, and you would go to your first shot would be double action. And you got a very stiff trigger, and then every subsequent shot would be single action. Now, the gun is very accurate. It does shoot high. The sights are non-adjustable, so I had to figure out the aim point. In fact, one of the quirky things about the gun is, when I go back to 20, 25 yards, seems like the elevation rises even more. But that just takes getting used to the firearm. Now, I wanted a magazine for it because it only came with the one magazine. And one of the things that I researched and found is that the CZ magazines from the time that this gun was made does not fit this gun. There are other parts that are interchangeable. However, the modern CZ magazines do fit this gun, which seems kind of contradictory. I picked this one up. It's 19 rounds, and I've tested it out, and it works very, very well. It was kind of interesting. I went in and I asked the guy in the store about the compatibility of the magazines, and he said, well, wait just a second, because I'd asked him, said, have you got some snap caps I can kind of cycle through this gun? And he said, well, here, wait a second. So he went and got one of his personal magazines, loaded it with 4 rounds, and said, just go around back and shoot it in the bank and see if it cycles. And I was like, oh, absolutely. And it cycled well, and I've shot several magazines through it with no hang-ups. So what's the similarity here with the TZ and this old Winchester? And the point I'm trying to make is that you're going to come across, I go to pawn shops and FFLs that take in a lot of older guns, and you're going to find that many firearms have never been shot before. And they may be 20, 30, 40 or older, and they've never been fired except maybe at the factory. And when a gun sits up that long, like any mechanical device, it's meant to be used. But if a gun sits up for any length of time, it's not going to run like it's supposed to. Now, this gun here, my father, when he passed away, I got this one and a couple of his shotguns, and I noticed that it was not cycling ammunition properly. And I cleaned it and I oiled it, and it still wasn't cycling ammunition like it should. and it would get hung up, and I'd have to take it apart. And so I finally asked a friend. He's a preacher. He's a pistol packing preacher, and in fact, he carries a 45 under his vest when he's up in the pulpit. And he makes sure that his flock is well protected. There are other members of his congregation that are armed during a service. But anyway, he's also a machinist, and he does contract work for one of the European manufacturers that has a plant here in the United States. And I asked him about it. He said, well, just come to church one Sunday morning, and we'll look at it after church. So after the service, I went and got this rifle, and I took it to him, and we went in his pastor's study, and he took it apart, and he lubricated it, and he worked the action and worked the action. And he said, you know something, Greg, I don't think this gun's ever been fired. Now, my dad probably bought this gun sometime in the late 70s, because that's when they quit making this model. These guns, you used to see them at places like Sears and J.C. Penney's. Some of them, I think, were manufactured under the Ted Williams brand. Interesting history. It's a beautiful gun with the wood stocks and the inlay, and once again, bluing that you don't see anymore. And my friend was right. The more I shot it, the more it loosened up, the more the action stabilized. And this gun's a very accurate shooter, a lot more accurate than I am. It's got a 20-inch barrel. It's actually more accurate than my Ruger American and my Ruger 1022, and possibly because they have the 18-inch barrel. But I like the buckhorn sights. I seem to do very well with those. Now, is this as rugged as either one of my Ruger 22s? No, I don't think this one would hold up to some of the beating I've put to those two guns. But it's still a very accurate gun, and it's still a very beautiful gun. It holds 18 rounds in the tube. And I actually gave this gun to one of my son-in-laws. And I told him, I said, thank you, because we shoot together sometimes. I said, I want to give you this. This was my father's. And I want you to pass it on to one of your grandchildren one day. And I said, I really appreciate you being good to my grandchildren and good to my daughter. And I looked at it, even though this has sentimental value as being my father's, I looked at this as an investment in someone who is closely tied to me and is helping to raise my grandchildren. So anyway, that's why I compared these two guns, these two very dissimilar guns together. They're both beautiful, they're both older, and they both had never been shot before I got my hands on them. So this is Greg with Lionquestfitness reminding you, as Mr. Holster would say, go out and stay safe.